Well, I'm Brian Croydragon, and welcome to today's stream. We'll be getting started in just a moment. You can come in, Alex. You've already forced the door open. Alright, right here you've got a map of the region of Rome. You've got Ravenna right there, Rome, Pompeii, Carthage, Constantinople, Ephesus, Jerusalem, Alexandria, Masada. Basically, Rome in the year 200. And here you've got the Roman menu, so you've got monuments and mysteries, people and politics, guides, work and play, the index. Alex, you can come in. Here's the monument for, here's the menu for monuments and mysteries. Bloody Arena, Rome Today, Worship and Sacrifice, A Day at the Races, the works. The menu for people and politics. And I do believe we'll be reaching the timetable of ancient Rome very soon. And very soon, I mean right now. This is the chronology of Rome. Actually, I don't think this is the timetable. No, that's a completely different thing. The 1200 legendary revival of Trojan hero Aeneas in Italy? No, that's not right. The traditional date for the fall of Troy is 1184 BC. Okay, you've got the earliest villages on Palatine Hill in the year 1000 BC. 814 Carthage, founded by Phoenicians. 800 Etruscans flourish in Italy. 753 traditional date of founding of Rome. 510 Rome becomes a republic. Gauls sack Rome in 340. 312 construction of Via Appia and Aqua Appia. 280 first Roman coins. 264 first recorded gladiator fight. 264 to 146 the Punic Wars. 73 Spartacus leads slave rebellion. 58 to 51 Caesar conquers Gaul. 27 to 14 AD Augustus becomes emperor. Oh wait, missed one. 44 Caesar assassinated. '54 Nero becomes emperor. 70 Jewish revolt. 79 Vesuvius buries Pompey. 117 Hadrian succeeds Trajan. 293 Roman Empire divided in two. 337 Constantine converts to Christianity. 404 Capital moves to Ravenna. 410 Visigoths sack Rome. 476 Fall of the Western Empire. 534 to 565 Justinian recaptures parts of Western Empire. 718 to 771 Arabs besiege Constantinople. Alex, you're fine. You can come in. And here you have the menu for work and play. Pompeii. The lovely city of Pompeii had little warning of the disaster about to strike. But suddenly, on a sunny summer day, Pompeii was sealed in darkness as if in a tomb. What had been a busy city in the morning was buried just hours later. The people who once lived there either escaped in panic or fell dead from poisonous gases in the streets, and lay silent and forgotten for nearly 2,000 years. I'll be right back. Of course, I go to pick up the phone and it's nobody. Nobody at all. That's annoying. In the shadow of Vesuvius. To the citizens of Pompeii, it was just a pretty mountain. Grapevines and pastures ran up its side. Once Mount Vesuvius had even provided refuge for Spartacus, a rebel slave. The city, just a short distance away, went about its business, making glass, fish sauce, leather, and dozens of other goods. Then, in the early afternoon of August 24, Mount Vesuvius exploded. A blizzard of ash rained down, covering Pompeii and everything around it in just a few hours. Wiped off the map. The ash and mud from Mount Vesuvius wiped out everything around it. Pompeii, Herculaneum, and other towns literally disappeared, and with the passage of centuries were almost forgotten. In fact, they lay hidden right up until the 18th century. A ghost town. Heavy ash collapsed roofs and pushed over walls. But as you walk the rough stone streets of Pompeii today, you can still recognize houses, shops, and apartment buildings. When they were first uncovered, some of the houses still had food on the table and furniture in the rooms. Things left behind as everyone fled the city in panic. Busy bakers. Many Roman bakeries did more than bake loaves of bread. They ground grain into flour too. These flour mills once had large grinding stones that were turned by slaves or donkeys. At home in Pompeii. Pompeii was just a small town compared to Rome, but in many ways it was probably a lot nicer to live in. Like big cities, it had public baths, a forum, and even an arena for gladiators to fight. For gladiator fights. Most people probably lived in apartments, but judging from the homes decorated with mosaics and frescoes, Pompeii's wealthier citizens lived a very comfortable life in the seaside city. Welcome to our home. Dinner guests visiting a friend's home in Pompeii were ushered into an atrium or courtyard in the middle of the house. It often had a pool or fountain and was a cool, quiet place to meet and talk before going into the dining room. Violent volcanoes. The disaster at Pompeii was just one of many catastrophes caused by volcanoes. Around the world, many volcanoes remain active and erupt, spewing ash into the air and burying towns and villages beneath tons of mud and volcanic rock. Mount St. Helens in the United States, Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines, and Nevada del Ruiz in Colombia are just some of the volcanoes that have erupted recently and killed many people. First-hand account. When Mount Vesuvius thundered awake after looming silently for more than 1,000 years, a Roman writer known today as Pliny the Younger recorded an eyewitness account of the disaster. Click the My Story button to hear him describe what happened. Right. Gonna have to go find that audio file then. Just one moment. Take it, it's this file here.
started to escape, darkness fell. Not the sort that is moonless and cloudy, but the kind of dark when a lamp has been extinguished in a closed room. You could hear the wailing of women, the cries of babies, and the shouts of men. Some were looking for their parents, others their children, and others for their wives. They were trying to identify one another by the sound of their voices. Some lamented their own fate or the fate of their loved ones, and some prayed for death. Many held their hands up to the gods, but more believed that there were no longer any gods, and that this was an eternal and final darkness for the world.
That is grim. Peculiar preserves. People left Pompeii in a hurry, leaving almost everything behind. When archaeologists uncovered some houses, they found food on the tables. Meals that had been waiting for nearly 2,000 years. Bread still showing the bakeries identifying stamps, satin ovens, and bones of walnuts stood on counters, as if the people of the house would soon return. Scientific feast. The things left behind in Pompeii are some of the best clues scientists have about daily life in ancient Rome. The volcanic ash caught an entire city as it was on a typical afternoon and sealed it as if it were a huge museum. City of Tombs. More than 2,000 people died in the disaster at Pompeii. The bodies have long since decayed, but they haven't disappeared. They left eerie impressions in the ash. When archaeologists make plaster casts, it's possible to tell what the people once looked like, what clothes they were wearing, and sometimes even how they died. Men, women, and children were all caught by the hot, poisonous gas and thick ash. Desperate dog. Pets died too. As scientists uncovered Pompeii, they even found family pets sealed in the ash, some still chained to posts. They had been left behind in the rush to escape the disaster. That is sad. Painted walls. The casts of bodies found at Pompeii show people caught in panic and trying to escape death. But Pompeii isn't just a giant tomb. Wall paintings and mosaics show a city once full of life. The art uncovered from the ash includes paintings of actors who kept busy at the town's theaters. Other artwork shows mischievous cats, elegant banquets, and ancient heroes in battle. Say cheese! Like a photo in a family album, this painting from Pompeii shows a serious young couple with some prized possessions, a writing tablet, and a stylus. A dark day. Pompeii's tragic end was a blessing for modern archaeologists. When Mount Vesuvius erupted, life in Pompeii came to a sudden halt. Many people fled the city with only the clothes on their backs, leaving behind a remarkable record of daily life in the Roman Empire. Houses, furniture, even food were perfectly preserved for centuries under tons of volcanic ash. Click the play button to step back in time and visit Pompeii yourself. And once again, pulling up an audio file. Hopefully it's this one.
For the citizens of Pompeii, a sunny August day 2,000 years ago was just another summer afternoon. All around the city, people were going about their business when a roar from the nearby mountain interrupted them. It was the beginning of the end for Pompeii.
That was not it. Is it this one?
The citizens of Pompeii...
No. Please tell me we do not have a missing audio file on our hands here. I think we do, so we'll just skip that and move on to the next one. The Bone Lady. Until it was buried by a volcanic eruption in 79 AD, Herculaneum was a popular resort for wealthy Romans, who built magnificent villas there, but the town's sudden death also gave it a kind of immortality. Today it provides experts with a fascinating look at a long-vanished world. One woman, Sarah Bazell, has spent years piecing together fragments of bones of people killed by the volcano. That's why some people call her the Bone Lady. Click the play button to see her story.
Nearly 2,000 years ago, hundreds of people died in a great disaster. Today, archaeologists have uncovered their bones. Bones that can tell a terrible story, if you know how to listen. Dr. Sarah Bazell is an American archaeologist who knows how to hear what bones have to say. She digs skeletons out of the ground and pieces together their stories. Her work has earned her the nickname, the Bone Lady. Here's where her work begins, in layers of ancient ash and mud that covered the city of Herculaneum. This is where Bazell studies skeletons, the way some experts read ancient inscriptions. One small pelvic bone can tell her that a skeleton came from a 27-year-old woman who had 2 or 3 children. Next to the skeletons, she often finds personal belongings. Judging from where she found this bracelet, Bazell thinks the woman carried it in her purse as she tried to outrun the deadly gas and ash from the volcano. Bones can be like pieces to a puzzle. When the pieces fit, an archaeologist can tell a lot about long-dead people. Whether they were men or women, what kind of food they ate, what kind of work they did. Take this skeleton. Bazell can tell by the ridges on the teeth that this young girl probably had very little food to eat when she was growing up. Every skeleton has a different story to tell, and archaeologists can give these ancient bones a chance to tell what their lives were like thousands of years ago.
When we continue on our way with A Day at the Races. The Romans loved chariot races even more than gladiator fights. Before dawn, crowds lined up for the best seats at the empire's largest racetrack, the Circus Maximus, in Rome. All day they watched 2- and 4-horse teams pull gleaming chariots in races around the huge oval track. The chariots often flipped over or crashed on the sharp turns, sending their drivers and horses tumbling. Winning drivers claimed a palm leaf and a purse of gold. Losers counted themselves lucky just to have survived. Circus Maximus. Race day in Rome meant going to the largest track in the empire, the Circus Maximus. The stadium, first built in the 6th century BC, was often repaired and expanded. At its largest, the track was about 3.5 stadia, almost 650 meters long and about 125 meters wide. Rows of seats held up to 250,000 eager spectators. Like fans today, people bet on their favorite horses and bought sausages, pastries and wine from shops and stalls at the stadium. They often got into fights over which driver was the best racer. Crash Course. Races at the Circus Maximus lasted 7 laps, about 8 kilometers. The first team across the finish line didn't always draw the biggest cheers. Crowds loved to see chariot crashes, which often injured or killed the drivers and the horses. A famous race. Chariot races weren't contests between gladiators. Most of the drivers were men hardened by lives as slaves or laborers. But some drivers were just boys, picked because they wouldn't weigh down the chariots. Young or old, all drivers raced for more than just a trophy. As this scene from Ben-Hur shows, they raced for their very lives. Click the play button to see what a woman chariot race was like. I think it's this one. Yeah, it is. That's not all to a day at the races. Here's the final part of this section. What a gamble! Watching chariots crash was just a part of the fun at the Circus Maximus. The races were a business too. Many people bet on their favorite chariot factions, teams with names like the Blues, Greens, Reds, and Whites. Wealthy citizens owned the factions and collected prize money from the victories of horses with names like Whirlwind, Hawk, Pleasure, and Proud. The Emperor Caligula was so fond of his horse named Incitatus, Fast Mover, that he tried to award the animal a government title. A tamer contest. The flashy, dangerous chariot races of Rome have long since run their course. But racing fans can still watch a modern, stately version of the ancient sport in harness racing. Horses put small, light buggies at a fast trot. Oh, right, this is the long one. Rulers of the Roman Empire. For 500 years, absolute power in Rome belonged to whoever held the title Emperor. Beginning with Augustus, 79 men ruled the empire. Here are some of the most important. Only a few emperors ruled and died peacefully. Men who took power by force often died at the hands of the same soldiers they had once commanded. Ambitious sons killed their fathers, and brothers murdered brothers to earn the right to be hailed Emperor of Rome. Julius Caesar. At first, Julius Caesar ruled the Roman Republic, together with two other generals, Crassus and Pompey. But then the three men became enemies. Crassus died in battle, leaving Pompey as Caesar's only rival. Caesar's bold attempts to take power finally started a civil war. Pompey fled to Egypt and was murdered in 48 BC. When Caesar, who had been off fighting his rivals in a civil war, returned to Rome in 45 BC, the Senate made him dictator for life. But that honor didn't last very long. Violent end. Desperate to keep Caesar from becoming a king, the Senate plotted to kill him. 3 senators finally murdered Caesar on the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC. Augustus. A young man named Octavian, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, was the first true Roman emperor. He was only 19 when Caesar died in 44 BC. Just 11 years later, he had crushed his rivals and captured Egypt. Although he refused many formal titles, he kept the one that mattered most. He retained the title Imperator as supreme commander of the military and of the entire Roman world. And in 27 BC, the Senate honored him with the name Augustus. When he died, the Senate declared him a god. A lasting reminder. Augustus boasted that when he became emperor, Rome was a city of sun-dried brick, and that he rebuilt it clothed in marble. To honor him, 1 month of the Roman calendar was even renamed from Sextilis to Augustus, the month we call August today. Bitter end. Some people think Augustus's third wife, Livia Drusilla, poisoned him. This would have allowed Tiberius, her son from her first marriage, to succeed Augustus as emperor. Caligula. Caligula got his nickname Little Boots from his father's soldiers. As a boy, he often dressed up in a uniform, complete with a little sword, shield, and boots called Caligae in Latin. But Caligula wasn't so charming when he grew up. Even the brutal Tiberius once called him a viper. Caligula ordered the murder by slow torture of anyone he considered to be an enemy. Still, he loved horses and kept his favourite in a marble stable. He even tried to make the animal a consul. Such excesses finally drove Caligula's own guards to murder him. Change of mind. A serious illness made Caligula insane, and he demanded to be worshipped as a god. He even had the tops removed from famous statues of Greek gods, and then replaced them with models of his own head. Claudius. In 41 AD, Claudius, nephew of Tiberius, became emperor. He was 50 years old, and his stutter and limp made everyone think he was stupid, but Claudius was a lot smarter than he seemed. In fact, he may even have faked the limp and stutter so that Caligula wouldn't find him threatening. Today, experts think he was a good administrator. He also acquired new territory during his rule. Britain became a province of the empire. Unpleasant end. Claudius probably had his second wife killed. Many experts think his last wife, Agrippina the Younger, returned the favor by poisoning him in 54 AD to secure the throne for her son by another marriage, Nero. Nero. The infamous Nero was the last of Julius Caesar's relatives to rule Rome. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, had convinced Claudius to adopt Nero. Although Seneca tutored the young Nero, he didn't turn out well. When Nero fell in love with a former slave, his mother was furious. Legend says he tried 3 times to poison her. Then he rigged a trap to make the ceiling above her bed fall and crush her. When that scheme failed, he put her on a boat designed to fall apart at sea, but she swam safely to shore. A song in his heart. A fire destroyed much of Rome in 64 AD. Although many people think Nero fiddled as Rome burned, he actually sang a song about the fall of Troy. Nero blamed the blaze on a new religious sect called the Christians, and he built an extravagant palace on the newly cleared land. A few good deeds. Nero did shelter the poor made homeless by the fire, but a plague followed the fire, and Nero grew more unpopular. He finally fled Rome and was forced to commit suicide as soldiers closed in on him in 68 AD. Vespasian. Vespasian, founder of the Flavian dynasty, won the fight for power in 69 AD. The year of the 4 emperors. Vespasian came from a poor family, and he lived simply. Rumor said he made a lot of money illegally, but most Romans respected him as a soldier and a leader. Unlike many emperors, he had 2 strong sons to continue in his footsteps, and he died peacefully after expanding and strengthening the empire. Lasting legacy. Historians remember Vespasian as a brilliant general and a good ruler, but the Roman people probably thanked him more for beginning construction of the Colosseum on land that had once been part of the hated Nero's palace. Yeah. Titus carried on the work of his father Vespasian. While Vespasian returned to Rome from Palestine in 69 AD to take power, Titus remained in that country and captured Jerusalem for the empire. When he became emperor himself in 79 AD, Titus dedicated the Colosseum. The people adored him for the spectacles he staged there. Titus didn't meet a peaceful end, however. He died just 2 years after taking power, poisoned by his ambitious younger brother Domitian. Ill omen. The eruption of Vesuvius buried Pompeii and Herculaneum near the beginning of Titus's reign in 79 AD. The Romans, a suspicious people, consider this a bad omen for Titus. Trajan. In 117, during the rule of Trajan, the empire grew as large as it would ever be. The second of the 5 good emperors, Trajan was a simple man and a brilliant general. He conquered lands that are today known as Romania, Armenia, and Iraq. He oversaw the construction of new roads and other improvements, especially along the empire's northern borders. Trajan even expanded the empire's assistance to poor children. Marble Scroll. Trajan's conquests in Dacia are celebrated in a frieze wrapped around the column of Trajan. The stone stands almost 40 meters tall in Rome today. Hadrian. Hadrian, the great-nephew of Trajan, ruled during the happiest period in the history of the Roman Empire. He traveled throughout the Roman world and decided that the empire had grown too large. So Hadrian reorganized the government and legal system and built defenses to protect the emperor's borders. Hadrian's Wall. Today, Hadrian is most famous for a stone wall that stretches across northern Britain. A similar wall went up in Germany during his rule. They were supposed to keep barbarians out of Roman territory. Marcus Aurelius. Peace and quiet. Marcus Aurelius wanted nothing more than to read and write his meditations. But this famous Stoic philosopher spent most of his reign along the empire's borders, repelling the barbarian attacks. Forced to raise taxes to pay for more soldiers, he became increasingly unpopular at home. He tried to help people during famine and emergencies by selling his personal possessions to buy food for the poor, but he also mercilessly persecuted Christians, believing that they challenged imperial authority. Doomed by disease, Rome's eastern armies brought the plague back home to the capital. The disease killed thousands of citizens and eventually took the life of Aurelius himself, the last of the 5 emperors. The last of the 5 good emperors. Septimius Severus. The very Romans welcomed Septimius Severus, a famous soldier who was born in a Roman family that lived in Africa. He had marched on Rome after the murder of the Emperor Commodus. To calm fears about a military takeover, this clever commander switched from full uniform to civilian clothes before entering the city. Severus quickly reorganized the military, raised the soldiers' pay, and executed his enemies. A grand arch dedicated in 203 celebrated his military victories and the 10th anniversary of his reign. A soldier's death. Septimius died in Britain during a military expedition. On his deathbed, he ordered his sons to live in peace, keep the soldiers happy by raising their pay, and despise the rest of the world. Instead, the brothers hated each other. Period of anarchy. Bribery and murder became the path to power in the second half of the 3rd century. About 20 emperors ruled Rome in less than 50 years. All owed their power to the military, not the Senate. But the imperial throne was hardly safe. The same troops who chose emperors like Gallus, Aemilianus, Valerianus, and Gallienus soon murdered each of them in turn. Deadly job. In 276 AD, Probus took control and cleared Gaul of barbarians and secured the empire's borders. But when he tried to use the troops for peaceful purposes, such as cleaning canals in Egypt, they killed him. Constantine the Great. Under Constantine, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. He proclaimed complete religious freedom and restored property that earlier emperors had taken from the Christians. But some experts think that the colossal statue that honored Constantine shows that he also wanted to be worshipped himself. Another Alexander. Like Alexander the Great, Constantine founded a grand new city in 330. He dedicated Constantinople as the new capital of the empire. Today, Constantinople is called Istanbul. Romulus Augustulus. The last ruler of the Western Empire was named Romulus Augustus. The first part of his name recalled the fame of Rome's legendary co-founder Romulus, the boy raised with his brother Remus by a rough. His second name echoed the glory of Rome's first emperor Augustus, but he was better known by a nickname, Augustulus, which means Little Augustus. It mocked the boy, who was just a puppet of his father and served only 1 year. Prophecy fulfilled. An ancient legend said that Romulus saw 12 eagles in the sky when he and his brother founded Rome in 753 BC. The sign meant that Rome would endure for for 1200 years. The real end of ancient Rome came in 476. 1239 years after the city was founded. Well, I wouldn't exactly call that a prophecy fulfilled. It was off by 29 years. Oh, hey, do. Can't see you're watching. Next up, we have worship and sacrifice. The Romans worshipped many gods, from strange deities honored in small villages to the mighty Olympian gods, first worshipped by the Greeks. To win the favor of the gods, people offered them bones, sheep, goats, and other animals, and sometimes simpler gifts such as flowers, wine, milk, and incense. If I was a god, I'd ask for the simpler gifts. As they traveled throughout the empire, Romans learned about and began to worship many foreign gods such as Isis from Egypt and Mithras, a god from Persia, who was especially popular with traders and soldiers. I'm doing good, thanks. Just continuing through the Roman section here. Temples and ceremonies. The Pantheon has one of the largest domes ever built. Roman officials once gathered here to honor the ancient gods. Sometimes they also used temples like banks in which to store the empire's treasure, but the ceremonies at Roman temples weren't held just to please the gods. Emperors and senators thought solemn processions and spectacular sacrifices helped to maintain order and remind the people of their duty to the empire. Keepers of the Flame. The special priestesses, called the Vestal Virgins, lived and worked in a sanctuary built to remind people of the huts of the first Romans. They tended a sacred flame that burned there day and night. It was a great honor to serve as a Vestal Virgin, but if one of the virgins violated her oath, she could be sealed alive in a tomb. Ah, lovely. A barter system. Everyone, even emperors, tried to please the gods by leaving offerings and making sacrifices. On important holidays, the emperor led priests and high officials to the temples, where they honored the gods by sacrificing many animals. To show his thanks to the gods after he defeated the assassins of Julius Caesar, Augustus built a magnificent new temple to Mars. He even gave Mars a new title, Altor the Avenger. Could say Mars is the first Avenger, not Captain America. Yeah, obvious joke. Sweet revenge. The offerings made at temples weren't always just to honor the gods. To get revenge, Romans wrote curses on tablets and left them at the temples, hoping the gods would bring harm to their enemies. One fan of chariot races left this curse on the team he hated. I ask you to torture and kill the horses of the white and green teams, and kill and crush utterly their drivers, Clarus, Felix, Primellus, and Romanus. Wow, sports were serious back then. A real sacrifice. An animal sacrifice was the most important part of many religious ceremonies in Rome. If priests made even the smallest mistakes in the ritual, everyone feared that the gods would reject the offering. After careful preparation, the priests signaled that they were ready, and people came forward with roosters, bulls, pigs, sheep, and goats to be butchered at the altar. In one cult, people stood below a special altar and bathed in the animal's flowing blood. Ancient ritual. Long before the Romans, the Egyptians sacrificed animals to their gods. To make the offering more pleasing to the gods, the animal was carefully selected, washed, and decorated. Ancient astrology. Emperors often issued orders prohibiting the common people from consulting with astrologers who predicted the future by watching the planets and performing elaborate calculations. But many suspicious and superstitious emperors had their own official astrologers to warn of treasonous plots and to give them advice about important decisions. Gods in the sky. The Romans knew of 5 planets, plus the sun and the moon. Mercury was named for the fleet-footed messenger god. Bright mysterious Venus was the sign of the goddess of love. Blood-red Mars represented the god of war. Colossal Jupiter ruled the heavens, and distant Saturn was a god of agriculture. A family affair. For a Roman, each day began with solemn ceremonies at a family shrine called the Larorium. Led by the paterfamilias, everyone offered food and prayers to the gods and spirits that protected the home. The goddess of the hearth, Vesta, was especially important in early Roman times. A day off. The Roman calendar had lots of religious holidays. More than 100 feasts, festivals, and celebrations every year. Although holidays were named for the gods, many holidays were just an excuse for feasts, entertainment, and lavish parties. If we still had those holidays, they'd probably wreak havoc to the school system. An emperor to remember. Like many emperors, Vespasian was declared a god when he died. Perhaps he was more deserving of the honor than most. He restored order after a terrible civil war, and he must have seemed like a hero to some people because he started work on the Colosseum. The historian Tacitus even said that Vespasian was the first emperor changed for the better by power. A temple in the country. The first emperor, Augustus, may not have minded being called a god, but he didn't want to be worshipped in Rome. So temples to honor him and his wife Livia were instead built in the provinces, especially in the east. This temple still stands in France. Roman society. For a few Romans, even frugal emperors like Augustus, life was luxurious. Banquets, expensive clothes, fine wines, slaves, these things and more were available only to privileged citizens like senators and wealthy businessmen. For the rest of the empire's people, life was a daily struggle. Many were glad to find any work, even an exhausting job in the mounds. Emperors tried to keep people happy with gifts of grain and spectacular gladiator fights at the Colosseum. Still, Rome was often on the verge of revolt. Well, considering how the empire started with going from a good ruler to a bad one, to a worse ruler, to a good one, to another bad ruler. Yeah, I'd say that makes perfect sense. The role of the emperor. The first emperor, a man named Octavian, didn't keep his old family name for long. The Senate granted him the name Augustus, and from that point on, emperors exercised nearly absolute power. They often wore purple, the color of a king, made with dye from seashells. The Senate declared many emperors gods. Even Constantine, the emperor who made Christianity the official state religion, had a huge statue made in his own honor. Some say he too wanted to be worshipped. Show a little respect. Some emperors may have declared themselves gods, but the lower classes didn't always worship them. People mocked Tiberius by changing his full name, Tiberius Claudius Nero, to Tiberius Claudius Nero, which in Latin means drunken wine guzzling boozer. Well, that certainly is an accurate description of Tiberius. Of course, a drunken wine guzzling boozer was probably better than the insane Caligula. Soldiers in society. The Roman army conquered distant lands and brought vast riches to Rome, but soldiers also kept the peace throughout the empire and built roads that expanded trade. Through the centuries, many men earned the benefits of Roman citizenship after serving in the army. Perhaps more important, by settling in the provinces and marrying local women, retired soldiers spread Roman culture throughout the ancient world. A long reminder. The Emperor Hadrian ordered soldiers to build a wall about 117 kilometers long in northern Britain to protect the empire from the Caledonians in what is now Scotland. Hadrian's Wall is just one of many such projects built by the Roman army. Senators and citizens. Roman senators weren't elected like members of Congress or Parliament. They came from the highest level of Roman society. During the Republic, senators were chosen by consuls and later by censors in imperial time. In imperial time, senators inherited the office from their fathers. Even the powerful businessmen called Acritus cannot become senators. But the lowest citizens still had important rights. They could appeal to the emperor and could have grievances heard in court. And every citizen, from shopkeeper to senator, could visit the public baths. Daily grind. Working in a mill was one of the hardest jobs in Rome. People were treated like animals. One man even scratched this message on a mill wall. Work, little donkey, just as I have worked, and a lot of good it will do you. Administration and empire. At the height of its power, Rome controlled dozens of provinces from Britain to Egypt and beyond. Emperors sent governors and other officials to the provinces. These men commanded the local army, collection taxes, and supervised hundreds of construction projects. Although corruption was often a problem, the government still served millions of citizens. In fact, through its network of roads, governors could send messengers from what is now Spain to Rome. More than 500 kilometers in just 7 days. Asian capital. Roman governors ruled from cities like Ephesus, capital of an Asian province. This busy port was second only to the great city of Alexandria in Egypt. The Romans used the famous temple of Artemis as a bank where subjects paid their taxes. Rich and poor, freedmen and slaves. Many upper-class Romans literally worked their slaves to death, or just disposed of them when they were no longer useful. Some masters treated their slaves better and eventually granted them freedom. Such freedmen often became part of the family they had once served. Some slaves, especially those brought from Greece, were well educated and served as doctors, teachers, and administrators. Most, however, were probably cooks, maids, or farm workers. Ticket out. Even gladiators, most of whom were slaves, could earn their freedom after winning enough contests. When a gladiator's fighting days were over, he often received a wooden sword or discharge ticket, a bone inscribed with his name. Children in society. Children shared their parents' fate in Rome. Those from rich families lived in comfort. They inherited or married into positions of wealth and power. Children of slaves or laborers belonged to their parents' owners and could be bought and sold like any other property. But rich or poor, Roman children had only a few years for toys and games. By the time they reached their teens, they were considered adults, ready to work or serve the empire. Idyllic life. A lucky child lived in the life shown in this relief, but few children grew up like this boy with fancy toys and the chance for a good education. The Romans at home. Many Romans wouldn't have understood the old saying, "There's no place like home." Home is just a place to sleep and eat. People didn't have much time to relax, and unless they were rich, they had their fun outside the home. But the ruins of Roman cities like Pompeii show that there were usually all kinds of things to do, and give us a pretty good idea of what daily life was like. Click the play button to see a life to see a look at life in ancient Rome. Just give me a moment and I'll pull up the video file.
What was life like for people in the Roman Empire? The things they left behind give us a good idea. For example, do you know what ancient Romans ate? These large ovens tell us they must have baked a lot of bread. And this well-preserved meal of walnuts, bread, figs, and eggs shows us they enjoyed lots of other food. Romans liked life's finer things too. Archaeologists still find fancy gold and silver jewelry in towns from all over the ancient empire. They also surrounded themselves with art, like here in this magnificent public bath. But the most popular entertainment was at the amphitheater, where crowds watched wild animal hunts and saw gladiators fight to the death.
And we carry on to the Roman street scene. Cities like Rome were crowded, noisy, and busy. During the day, people shopped at small stores on the apartment blocks, fetched water, and visited the public baths. Crowds rushed to the Colosseum or to the latest play at the local amphitheater. In workshops, artisans made glass, pottery, shoes, everything a big city needed. But at night hardly anyone went out. Thieves and thugs lurked in the dark, while wagons and carts, forbidden in the city during the day, rattled through the narrow streets, making it hard for anyone to sleep. Must have been the equivalent of living by a train track. Paper makers. The Romans thought their arches, concrete and glass made them very up to date, but for letters and documents they used papyrus, a material as old as the Egyptian pharaohs. In fact, most papyrus still came from Egypt, where artisans used ancient techniques to turn papyrus stalks into thin sheets of paper. Strips of paper were then joined into long scrolls. Scribes hand-copied contracts, poetry, speeches, and history onto scrolls, which for centuries were the empire's only books. A real book. It wasn't until the 4th century AD that books became common in the empire. They were made of sheets bound between covers. A book made this way was called a codex. Perfect pots. Artisans came to Rome from all over the empire to practice their trades. The city was full of small shops where people could find everything from bronze plates and bowls to all kinds of pottery. Some craftsmen came from the empire's provinces where they learned ancient ways of making life's necessities. Fancy vase. Glass vases like this were made by artisans who had learned how to blow glass instead of forming it in molds. That technique was one of many skills people from the provinces brought to Rome. Apartment dwellers. For most people in big cities, home was a couple of rooms in a building on an apartment block called an insula. People lived and worked in these buildings. Many apartments probably weren't very pleasant, however. With all the activity, people had little privacy or quiet. Few buildings had running water and many were poorly built. Collapse or fire were constant threats. A better life? Some slaves on a large country estate may have lived better than many people crammed into city apartments. At least farm workers had fresh air and fresh food. I'd say that the apartments of today are probably better than the apartments of back then too. And I should know, when my parents temporarily divorced, my dad took residence in an apartment building and my mom in a townhouse complex, which, well, that's where I am now. Bread bakers. Rome would have starved without its bakeries. Since most people didn't have kitchens, they depended on bakeries for bread, their basic food. Hundreds of bakeries all over the city turned out bread for the masses. Just getting enough flour was often difficult. However, local farmers couldn't grow nearly enough grain, so Rome had to import most of its supply from Egypt. Ancient mill. Sometimes bakeries had their own mills for turning grain into flour. These mills were well preserved beneath the ashes that buried Pompeii. Well, I shouldn't say the apartments have perfectly improved. I mean, collapse isn't exactly a threat anymore, but having quiet is still difficult. Buying and selling. Some upper-class Romans thought buying and selling was an unsuitable occupation for a gentleman, unless he got very rich doing it. So much of the empire's business went on in tiny shops in cities like Rome and Pompeii. You could buy almost anything in Rome, from basic bread to expensive treasures like Chinese silk if you had enough money. Give unto Caesar. Tax collecting was a big job too, and corruption was always a problem. Tax collectors often forced people to pay more than they really owed, and then kept a portion for themselves. Well, that's a dick move. Today's Romans. You can still get an idea of what life was like in ancient times by visiting small towns and villages in modern Italy. Their daily life around work, family, and religion, just as it did. Their daily life revolves around work, family, and religion, just as it did centuries ago. Open-air markets in modern villages are about the same as they were centuries ago. Click the play button to see what life is like today in one Italian village. I'll do that in just a moment. Yeah, I guess some things haven't changed. For God's sake, MK player, stop critting on me when I just want to get to a video file. No, not that one, not the one we just watched.
Excavated ruins and works of art give us a rare glimpse into the lives of the ancient Romans. But today, modern Italy is alive with a culture all its own. This small town near Naples looks like many Italian coastal villages. In places like this, generations of families have made their living from the sea. Fresh fish is sold at the local markets, along with all sorts of fruits and vegetables. This isn't like a supermarket. Vendors call out prices, and shoppers try to get a bargain. Sometimes it takes a while for everyone to agree. Religion plays a large role in the lives of many Italians. The leaders of the Catholic Church live in Rome. Throughout Italy, people gather daily to celebrate Mass. Of course, people still flock to Italy's world-famous beaches. One tradition from ancient Roman times that lives on today.
And next up, we have a trip to the theater. The theater was one of Rome's most popular entertainments. Actors performed in all kinds of plays, from tragedies to slapstick comedies, featuring characters like sneaky slaves and silly old men. Many Roman playwrights copied stories from Greek plays, but they also tried to impress audiences with witty, eloquent speeches. Sometimes, though, it was hard to hear the actors. Crowds booed, argued, and cheered during the plays. Sometimes they even started riots. Masked players. Like players in ancient Greek dramas, Roman actors wore masks on stage. The masks made it easy to tell what characters they were playing, man or woman, citizen or slave. Although almost everyone enjoyed plays, Rome's upper-class citizens thought actors were scandalous. Women who attended plays weren't allowed to sit in the front row, where they might be tempted to run off with the players. It was even a crime for a senator or anyone in his family to marry an actor. Final act. After gladiator fights became popular, it was sometimes hard to fill the theaters. So, producers staged spectacular plays in which actors were actually killed. In one drama about the death of Hercules, a slave or criminal playing the lead role was burned to death right in front of the crowd. Well, that's something that certainly wouldn't fly today. A place for plays. Like many of the plays performed in them, Roman theaters were based on the Greek model. The stage was open to the sky, but it had a back wall with doors and curtains. Theaters often held several thousand people, and tickets were free. Sometimes the actors even threw presents such as fruit and tickets for prizes into the crowd. But the best seats went to upper-class citizens. The poor had to sit high up in the last rows. Timeless drama. Many theaters from ancient Greece and Rome, like this one at Epidaurus, are still used for special performances today. Alex, you can come in. Players and playwrights. Leading citizens didn't admire actors, but they honored playwrights. Once when an actor spoke a brilliant line by Terence, the crowd jumped to its feet and applauded. Comedies written by Terence and Plautus were among the most popular plays in Rome. But even they couldn't fill a theatre if a big show was on at the Colosseum. Terence complained that while one of his plays was being performed, the audience rushed off during the first act to see a gladiator fight instead. Fan club. Not everyone considered actors disgraceful. The walls of Pompeii are covered with love notes to popular actors, including several signed by an adoring fan club. The more things change, the more they stay the same, as the old saying goes. Okay, do take your time. Timetable of ancient Rome, and this is where it gets long. Roman civilization lasted about 1200 years from its legendary founder in 753 BC to the collapse of the Western Empire in 476 AD. But in less than 1,000 years of history, only a third as long as the ancient Egyptian civilization endured. The Romans grew from a few tribes of farmers and hunters into the mightiest empire the world has ever known. And just the same thing there. The legend begins. Ancient tradition said that Rome, the Eternal City, was founded in 753 BC by Romulus and Remus, twin sons of the war god Mars. The wicked king Amulius ordered that the boys be left to drown in the Tiber River, but a female Rough rescued and nursed them. Grown strong on Rough's milk, they overthrew Amulius and then decided to found a city. But when Remus mocked a sacred ceremony, Romulus was furious. He killed his brother and became the first king of Rome, the city named for him. Mystery people. A people called the Etruscans created one of the earliest civilizations in Italy. Etruscan art, like this famous statue of the Rough that raised Romulus and Remus, and their skill in metalworking spread throughout the Mediterranean world. The early Republic. Rome became truly Roman when Lucius Iunius Brutus drove the last Etruscan king from the city in 509 BC. Wealthy noblemen and landowners created a senate that each year elected 2 men called consuls to rule Rome. The government, known as the Republic, lasted nearly 500 years, and Rome grew to rule the Mediterranean world. But before that could happen, the Republic had to endure wars with the Samnites, a Greek king named Pyrrhus, and mighty Carthage, home of a brilliant general named Hannibal. Welcome back to... We're on the timetable of ancient Rome. Sneak attack. Hannibal tried to crush Rome in 218 BC by crossing the Alps into Italy. His army included elephants to be used like tanks. This one again. His army, including elephants to be used like tanks, reached the outskirts of Rome, but the Romans refused to surrender, and after years of fighting, Hannibal had to retreat. From republic to empire, civil wars, slave revolts, corruption, and the demands of the provinces finally proved too much for the republic to endure. From 133 BC to 31 BC, Roman armies fought one another. German tribes humiliated once proud legions, and the Senate ruled by plot and intrigue instead of by reason and law. Finally, in 49 BC, a general named Julius Caesar crushed all his opponents and marched triumphantly into Italy. The weary republic, desperate for leadership, soon had little choice but to make him dictator for life. The first emperor. Caesar's reign lasted just 5 years. In 44 BC, he was murdered by senators who feared he would never give up power. Years of civil war followed until Caesar's adopted son Octavian took control of Rome in 27 BC, with the new name Augustus ruled as its first emperor. Rome burns. By 64 AD, Rome was one of the largest cities in the ancient world. Rich with treasure from its conquests, it was still growing rapidly. Then a great fire suddenly swept through crowded blocks of wooden apartment buildings and destroyed 10 of the city's 14 districts. The blaze also helped hasten the end of Nero's reign. Although he blamed the fire on the Christians, some people suspected that Nero had set it himself to further his own grandiose plans. Golden opportunity. For Nero, the fire was a great opportunity. He built a golden house on land cleared by the blaze. At last, he said, when he moved into the huge, luxurious palace, I can begin to live as a human being. Disaster at Pompeii. Quiet for more than 1,000 years, Vesuvius loomed above the pretty town of Pompeii, a resort famous for its tasty wines, spicy fish sauce, and fragrant perfumes. But suddenly, on a sunny August afternoon, Pompeii was wiped off the map when Vesuvius exploded. Hot, poisonous gas killed people fleeing in terror, and then a thick blanket of ash buried the entire town. 2,000 years later, eerie plaster casts of bodies still show how and where many people died. Dead in their tracks. You could hear the wailing of women, the cries of babies, and the shouts of men, wrote a survivor called Pliny the Younger. Many held their hands up to the gods, but more believed that there were no longer any gods, and this was an eternal and final darkness for the world. Not the world, just for Pompeii. But admittedly, that probably doesn't make things any better. The empire expands. On his deathbed, The first Emperor Augustus warned his successors not to expand the empire, but the glory of conquest and the need for more treasure were temptations too strong to resist. For more than 100 years, emperors expanded Rome's borders. By 117 AD, during the rule of Trajan, the Roman Empire stretched from Britain to Africa, and all the way east to Persia. Trajan was so successful that the Senate later offered the following good wishes to new emperors. May you be more successful than Augustus, better than Trajan. Towering tribute. Trajan's Column, which still stands in Rome today, celebrates the emperor's victories in Dacia and Parthia. Rule of Marcus Aurelius. Today, Marcus Aurelius is remembered as the last of the 5 good emperors, leaders who established and maintained the peace in the Roman world. A scholar and writer, Marcus Aurelius wanted nothing more than to enjoy that peace. Instead, he was always on the move, leading armies against barbarian attacks. Even when he defeated the barbarians, other threats loomed. The plague killed thousands in Rome, and the disease eventually took the life of even Marcus Aurelius himself. And yet his death has been portrayed as either by poisoning or suffocation. Incredible. Tragic legacy. Marcus Aurelius left the world both a great work of philosophy and one of the empire's cruelest rulers. His vicious son Commodus took the imperial throne and ruled so badly that in 192 his own troops arranged to have him strangled by a wrestler named Narcissus. Yes, he was strangled in his bath, not killed in the arena as he's been portrayed as dying in the film. Barbarians attack. The empire had barely reached its greatest extent under Trajan when it began to shrink. Hadrian gave up territory and built defenses against the barbarians pressing in on the empire from every frontier. From this point until the end of the empire in the west, Rome would enjoy only a few years of peace. Simple soldier. Barbarian soldiers like these Franks wouldn't seem to have much of a chance against Rome's well-equipped legions. But the barbarians proved themselves to be fierce, clever fighters. The empire is split. By the time of Diocletian, around 284 to 305, one man could no longer control the whole Roman Empire. So the new emperor split his territory in two. He appointed Maximian emperor of the west and took the throne of the east himself, with his capital at Nicomedia in what is now Turkey. But after a frustrating reign in which he failed to control prices and had to raise taxes, Diocletian resigned, and he convinced Maximian to do so as well. Tending the garden. After declaring himself a god, Diocletian retired to a huge palace in Dalmatia, on the eastern Adriatic coast, where he raised cabbages. Interesting career for a god. Constantine the Great. The task of reuniting the empire for the last time fell to a general named Constantine. In 312 AD, he met his most powerful rival, Maxentius, Emperor of the West, at the Milvian Bridge. During the fierce battle, Maxentius was thrown into the Tiber River and drowned, leaving Constantine in command. But it took Constantine another 11 years to defeat all his enemies and become the sole ruler of the empire. Deathbed convert. As emperor, Constantine stopped the persecution of Christians and restored property taken from them. He finally declared himself a Christian in 337 AD as he lay dying. Christianity rules Rome. For nearly the entire history of the empire, Christianity had been a problem for Rome. Jealous emperors persecuted members of the new faith because they would not worship them or the old gods. By the 4th century, many educated men sought careers in the church rather than the government or the army. In 313, Constantine made official what most people had long accepted. Christianity was the new religion of Rome. Martyrs' glory. Before Constantine accepted Christianity, many Christians had died as convicted criminals in the Colosseum and other arenas. For centuries, Christians buried their dead in underground cemeteries called the catacombs. The last emperor. The Roman Empire ended as it began. Led by an emperor named Romulus Augustulus, he was named after one of the legendary founders of Rome who was raised by a wolf, and also after the first emperor Augustus. But Romulus Augustulus was just a boy, hardly able to command an army or defend what remained of the empire from barbarian attacks. In fact, the last emperor was so pitiful himself that the German captain who captured him spared the boy's life. A millennium ends. Some 1200 years after it was founded, Rome was no longer a great city. By 476, it had been sacked for the last time, and the government had long since moved to Ravenna. But the Eastern Empire lived on in Constantinople for another 1,000 years. Barbarian retreat. Nearly 100 years after the last emperor ruled in the West, the leader of the East sent armies against the barbarians who had destroyed Rome. Under the command of able generals, Justinian's army pushed back the Vandals, Visigoths, and Ostrogoths. But the Roman way of life had already passed into history, and after Justinian's death in 565, the barbarians reclaimed the lands he had taken. Rule of law. Justinian, shown in this famous mosaic in Ravenna, only briefly restored the empire in the West, but his reform of the Roman legal systems became the foundation for laws across Western Europe into the Middle Ages and beyond. Yes, Rome eventually died, but it wasn't without its successor states. Italy, for instance, has survived quite well. That is all for today. But tomorrow we might just be finishing up our journey through Microsoft Ancient Lands. I'm Brian Croydragon, signing out. Stay Shrey.